Hi, Bevin. Thanks so much for coming on my podcast.
Hi, Tara. It's great to be here. I love what you're doing and excited to have this conversation today.
I'm so excited to have this conversation. I got your name from Denise Dryden because she said you have one of these children and you need to speak to Bevin. She's a wealth of knowledge. So here I was knocking on your door for a while.
Well, thank you. I'm glad we finally connected and I can come on and hopefully add some value for your listeners.
Yeah. So I'm I'm really grateful that you'll be here because I feel like more people will notice the children in their lives when they really start listening to this podcast or maybe the resources that kind of point to that. I think they'll see their children more in this when we start kind of to break it down. So you have what you are centered around more is highly sensitive and empathic people.
Yes.
And there's just so many different terms and labels that float around. And I know it can be difficult. I know it was difficult for me. I was listening to a podcast and they were, using HSP, INFJ, and they aren't necessarily different things, but they would lose me.
Mm-hmm.
So would you mind giving us a brief explanation of what a highly sensitive person is and then what the difference with an empathic person would be?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had the honor in 2018 to train with Dr. Elaine Aron, who was the research psychologist who actually coined the term highly sensitive person back in the early 90s. And she's done, 20 plus years of research in that. And as a matter of fact, she sent something out the other day that said there were like 90 different scientific studies across the world going on about HSP. And so I was really excited that this is really expanding out. Lots of people are interested in that. More and more people are realizing, wow, these characteristics kind of describe me. And so there is a really deep scientific research. There's brain scans. They've done tens of thousands of qualitative interviews and different types of laboratory testing around this. And so really, to keep it very simple, there's 4 different characteristics of being a highly sensitive person. And someone really needs to have all of these in order to be that. So first of all, I'll say that sensitivity is a human trait. And when we think about the word sensitivity, it has certain connotations, and some of those are more like, oh, that's a person who's weak or emotionally can't handle things. And from a scientific perspective, sensitivity really equals responsiveness. So everyone obviously has a brain and nervous system that interacts with the environment, every human being. And for highly sensitive people, our nervous system is more reactive than others. So if you think of kind of like a bell curve, there are people who have a low sensitivity to their environment. For example, I worked with this gentleman in the past who could wear shorts and a t-shirt in the middle of the winter. So he had a very low sensitivity to temperature and to cold and things like that, whereas I have a really high sensitivity to that. Most humans are moderately sensitive. So if they go into a restaurant, for example, most people would say, well, it's pretty noisy in here, or maybe it's kind of bright. So their nervous system is interacting with the environment moderately. And then there's about 20 to 25% of all people who are born with a nervous system that's more tuned in, like a kind of an open antenna, if you will. And we pick up so much more. So noises are amplified, light is amplified, traffic is more overwhelming, and so usually when sensitivity shows up, especially in children, it shows up as overwhelm, right? Until someone knows how to take care of themselves, so this sensitivity can be a great strength, and I'll talk about that. But we have to learn how to do our own self-care. And as parents, obviously, your listeners will want to look at how do I help my child learn how to have this self-care routine that really supports them so that they can use their sensitive gifts in a way that is a strength rather than a weakness. So the very first characteristic is, and this spells out an acronym, DOES, And the first one is depth of processing. So this is how deeply we think about everything. And sensitive people tend to look at a particular situation from 17 different angles and perspectives, and they'll think about something today, and they'll think about it tomorrow, and then 3 months from now, they're like, wait a minute, remember that conversation we had? I have another insight on that. And so we're taking all this information, all this data, and everything we're taking in, and we're making these connections. So depth of processing. So if you're a parent who has a child that comes across as older than maybe what their chronological age, they come out with these things and they say these things, or they have observations about the world, and you're like, wow, that was like 5 going on 30. Your child may be highly sensitive because they're processing and making all of these connections. So the second one is the O in DOES is overstimulation. And this is, again, like where it mostly shows up in the beginning, is that when our brain and nervous system takes in too much, we literally get drained. We get exhausted. We get overwhelmed. This may show up as just like temper tantrums, or falling out on the floor and like, I can't take anymore, your child, or just falling asleep at the dinner table. It's like you realize, wow, they're really overstimulated. And it's not that we can't go into crowded environments or we can't do things. I mean, I like to go to rock concerts, but we need some time before to prepare for that. And we need some time afterwards to be in our own energy, in our own space, and to come down from those experiences. So it's just more of a focus on the self-care piece. And I'll talk a little bit more about a personal experience that I had around overstimulation, but I want to make sure we get through DOES. So the E is emotional responsiveness and empathy. And so they did these studies where they showed people a picture of something that was really happy, other people being really happy, and they showed them a picture of people being really sad or kind of disturbing images. And they took them through this CAT scan machine, and for the people who scored higher on the high sensitivity test, our brain activates more with the positive images and more with the negative images. So we have this broader range of emotional responsiveness. So for example, if I see a beautiful sunset on the beach, I can be in awe, and I can just sit there and tears will be running down my face, right? And then if something traumatic happens or someone criticizes, we take that more deeply. And so if you see in your child, there's this like broader range of emotions. A lot of sensitive people cannot stand to see animals being hurt or watch violence on TV, or, like for me, I haven't watched TV or the news for like 5 years because a lot of it's really fear-based, and I kind of pick up on all of that. So that's really normal. And a tendency to be really empathetic towards others, being really caring. If your child's like, I don't understand why people are so mean to each other. Why is the world such a harsh place? I don't understand why people are putting trash in the ocean. Like, you might have a more sensitive child because they're really sensing into and feeling that deeply with other people. And then there's the S in DOES, which is sensitivity to subtleties. So it's noticing all the small nuances of life, whether that's a certain visual pattern, whether that's signs and synchronicities. They're just noticing everything. And one of the things that's very common for sensitive children and sensitive adults is when we go into a new environment, we do what's called pause to check. We will sit at the door and we'll watch and we'll notice everything. We're looking at who's talking with who, what the environment feels like. Do I feel comfortable and safe here? Who would I want to sit by? And we're just checking it out. And people have mistaken this for social anxiety or being shy, but we're actually really super engaged. And as soon as we kind of know where we fit in, we go in and we can be very social, very connected if we feel like people are safe and we can talk. So allowing your child time in a new place, in a new environment, to just take time to see what's going on. They may really be quiet. in that space. And that's okay, just allowing them that time. So there's a couple of other things about being a highly sensitive person, is that 50% are female and 50% are male. And so, as you can imagine, being a sensitive man or boy in our many of our cultures is not as honored. And it's getting better. These younger generations, and as people get more interested in things like emotional intelligence and knowing that it's okay to allow this range of emotions, boys are being more and more supported. But still, there's this idea that men need to kind of repress those emotions. So they're rewarded for being a deep thinker, but not for being a deep feeler. and so if in particular your listeners have a sensitive boy, allowing him to express himself, making it okay for him to have these strong emotions. This is really, really important, because when they feel shut down, this is where anger and even physical problems happen. When we shut ourselves down and we hold all that in, this is the thing. So understanding that sensitivity is across genders is really, really important. And to kind of bring in just another piece, about 70% of sensitive people are introverts, which means they like to go within more so. They recharge their energy by being alone, by kind of going within to their own inner world. But about 30% of HSPs are extroverts. So they recharge themselves by being social. Now the thing, and I have several friends and a family member who's an extroverted HSP. It's kind of this push-pull for them, because they want to be out with people and they need that. And to be home alone by themselves is kind of draining. So they need to be out and be energized, and then they get a little overwhelmed, and then they need to come home and be alone. And so extroverted HSPs need more downtime than sort of traditional extroverts, but you may see that your child really wants this social interaction, but then they're really tired afterwards. And that's normal, and just allowing that downtime and for anyone, allowing a child to really show you what they need at any given moment. If they're saying, I want to go, and, that means, okay, I'm done, because I think that we know kind of intuitively what's happening for us, and being able to just really honor what that looks like, and not pushing, to have them do more and do more and do more. So I said I wanted to offer this story. So I woke up this morning and I was reflecting back on this amazing conference I went to this last weekend. It was a futurism conference, and it was incredible. I was there with like 350 other people who were spiritually connected, tuned in, all of these perceptive souls, and had some amazing deep dive conversations, went to all these seminars. There was a cool after party, and I wore my tinfoil hat with my antenna. And I just really got to be very open and be myself. And so it was this amazing experience. And then I drove back from Austin here to Dallas, and I dove right back in on Monday morning to my business. I had coaching clients and I had all these things going on. And this morning I realized, wow, my energy is so scattered. I am all over the place. And I realized it would have been better for me with something so intense like that, where it was all weekend long and I was sort of immersed in it, to schedule downtime on Monday, to not be going right back into the workplace. And so today, after this podcast, I'm going to enter into the energy of seclusion, and I'm going to deliberately just be in my own space and listen to music and walk in the forest and kind of come back into myself. So what I say is that it's wonderful every day if we can schedule time as a sensitive person to be alone. And of course, as a child, that's going to vary. Once they get a little bit older, they can obviously do that, go into their room or have that time for themselves. I think my family was really good about allowing me to do that. But just having that quiet downtime is so important, because otherwise we go through this cycle where we get really, really into all these activities and then we crash. And then we get really into these activities and we crash. And what I realized for myself today is that I just needed to schedule that time. And so usually I do a little bit of that every day. I read for about an hour, and I'm here and I'm quiet and before I start work. So that's a really important piece, is to make sure as a parent that your child has that alone time, that downtime, that quiet time, especially after there's been several days, say you're at a family reunion, and there's been several days of all this human interaction, or you're, they have soccer and different things and different things scheduled. Whatever that looks like is just making sure that they have that downtime. So that's like essentially HSP in a nutshell, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then, so then how does the empathic part come in? Like,
Right.
is there a difference?
Right. So I've been working with sensitive and empathic people for about 7 years. And over the last couple of years, it really became clear to me, even though there's really no scientific research yet to support this, is there was like another category on that bell curve of maybe like an extremely sensitive person. And for me, I define being an empath as someone who can sense shifts in energy fields. Some people say it's also having a direct experience of another person's being, right? So how that shows up is that empaths can actually feel other people's feelings as if they're their own. So you may go into a space and you had no reason to be angry or sad, nothing happened to you. And someone else in the room is in that energy, is in that emotional state. And then you feel that inside your own body. All of a sudden you feel angry. For example, I was sitting at a staff meeting several years ago with my supervisor, and he was getting really upset about something that it didn't really matter to me at all. I had no particular emotional connection to it. And all of a sudden I felt this ball of energy rising up in my stomach, like I could feel his anger. And in that moment I said, you know what, this is not mine. I asked for it to be released. And immediately that whole thing went away. And so the body is a really great way to understand whether you're picking something up that isn't your own. And it shows up particularly in children, but also in adults, as being really drained. You go into a space and there's something intense happening. It's usually really intense emotions, but it can also be if people are really, really happy and really joyous as well. But you just feel really drained, and you don't know what it is. And some empaths can feel really depressed and they don't understand. They're like, my life is fairly good, and all of a sudden I just feel really depressed and then I can't even hardly get out of bed, and what's going on here? And this is really picking up on these energy shifts. But it's not just about emotions, because science tells us that everything is energy in motion. So we're picking up on mental energy sometimes. Some people are telepathic and they can actually sort of hear or understand people's thoughts. I say I'm really grateful I don't have that particular gift, because I have enough thoughts of my own without needing to hear everyone else's. But some empaths, and this is true of me, can actually feel other people's physical sensations inside their body. So there was one weekend when my shoulder was hurting so bad that I was going to go to the doctor, and I don't go very often. And then I called my mother that Sunday and I said, how's it going? She said, oh, my arthritis on my left shoulder is just killing me. And all of a sudden it just released out of my body. And my mother lives 900 miles away. So, it's really having this direct experience of someone else, or noticing when things shift. I also kind of consider myself an environmental empath, because I'm really tuned into the changes in the season, the changes in temperature. I can tell when a storm is coming, maybe 24, 48 hours in advance. I can feel the air pressure shift. And so it's all these subtleties. So the difference for me, between HSP and empath is that HSPs are noticing what's happening in our physical environment. They're actually seeing what's on the surface, right? So I would notice as an HSP that someone's body language is a little bit different today. I wonder if they're not feeling well. As an empath, I would actually feel nauseous because they're feeling nauseous, and so that's kind of the difference, is that you're having a direct experience. And some people in this category of extremely sensitive could be mediums. They might be able to sense energy of people who've passed on. I've also had that experience. Or clairvoyant, clairsentient, all the different clairs. And so it's kind of this other space. And there hasn't been a lot of scientific research because, at least right now, for most scientists, getting into this side of things is a place where you really put your reputation on the line. And people are like, oh, that's really woo-woo. And, but for a certain percentage of sensitive people, they are also empathic. And why I opened up my practice to expand into that space is because I wanted there to be a safe place where people could talk freely about these experiences. It's not something that you just go and go, wow, I had an experience of out-of-body travel or astral travel. Like, you don't just go into a regular place and talk about that. But if you've had those experiences, it's really important to know that there are other people who do that as well, and to be able to have an open space for it. So that's why I got into that part of it.
I just did an interview 2 days ago with a therapist who that's why we talked, was that there's no there, like, when I came upon this with my own kids, I was like, I do need a therapist, but who's going to believe me?
Mm-hmm.
And so I thank you for doing that. And I can't tell you how many instances in my mind also too, as you were going and describing this, like, popped into my mind. Like, I was thinking about every birthday party we'd ever been to and the moon bounce. I mean, that alone, Dominic could be in it for 15 seconds and that would totally wipe him out. Or school bus, couldn't make it on the school bus, couldn't, all of those things. We went to the Poconos to go skiing or indoor water park. And actually this was recently, and it was really good because he's older now, and we'd do some rides, a few rides there, and he'd go, okay, I need to go lay down. And he'd go into the room. And I mean, an hour in the water park and 3 hours in the hotel room. And then he'd pop back up and go, okay, I'm ready now. And it took time and years and my own evolution and all of those things. But it was like, ding, ding, all these things that were happening for us. And the pain in the arm, that's the funny joke that walks around here. If somebody gets hurt, if somebody gets cut on the cheek, somebody else will have the pain in the cheek, or another cut on the cheek. If somebody hurts their ankle, 2 other people will get hurt in the ankle here. Not that they will get hurt, they will feel the pain in the ankle. And I noticed too, when I take care of myself, yes, spiritually, mentally, but even recently, I've been doing more like physical exercise. The more I do it, yes, it's an example, but I notice that they're like, you know what? I feel like my body needs to move. It does this mirror thing that it took me a while to notice that was going on. So now, having talked about kids, since you being an empathic, highly sensitive person, what was it like for you growing up? And did you have support? Did your parents understand?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a very unique childhood, and that when I was 6, my mother and my stepfather moved to Oregon, and we moved from the suburbs of Detroit, which was, for those who are not in the United States, a pretty big metropolitan city, to a remote valley on the west coast of the United States. And I went to a 2-room schoolhouse. There were only 30 children in the whole school. So there was all this like really individualized attention, very creative space. We lived out, and we had 5 neighbors within like a 30-mile radius. And so very connected with nature. My family lived off the land. We raised all of our own vegetables, and we had this farm. And so we were really into that cycle of nature. I helped, on the farm as a child. So it was this really great way to grow up as an intuitive, empathic person. I just remember being able to be wide open. I had this one experience because at night there was no light pollution, so you could see all of the stars. And I had this experience as a child of laying down and then just feeling like I was one with the universe. I had this very deep spiritual transcendent experience at age 7. And so it was an amazing way to grow up. And after I kind of had this spiritual awakening, reawakening 7 years ago, I encouraged my mother to take the HSP test and the empath test, and she scored higher than I did. And so I don't think she understood that that's who she was back then. But then it made complete sense that I was supported and nurtured in that and allowed to be strange and weird. So, in my family, making a tinfoil hat and like wearing that to a party was like the norm, right? Like we were very creative and very unusual. And so for me, the challenges were to go out into the world and then realizing that other people's families and other people's experiences weren't quite like that, and how to navigate friendships and kind of being out in the world when I felt like very odd and weird, and even like maybe sort of like alien, like I had been dropped off on this planet. And so that, I was very fortunate to have that. Now I've worked with many clients who unfortunately, did not really have that supportive parenting. And we do a lot of work around the fact that different people are wired differently, and so as I said, there's this continuum of sensitivity, and if their parents were in that like lower to moderate sensitivity, they literally didn't experience the world the same way as a highly sensitive person or extremely sensitive person did. And so it doesn't mean that there wasn't people who were traumatized or had these really difficult situations, but this feeling of being misunderstood, of like nobody gets me. Why do I feel so weird? Why do I feel like the outsider? This is very, very common for children in their experience growing up, and then even into adulthood, because we are a cultural and temperate minority. We're not. we experience the world a little differently, and so there's some healing that can happen around that if we look back. If we look back into our childhood and we say there were people who didn't understand us, or we look back even into adult experiences, because they may not just have been able to, and it doesn't mean anyone's better or worse. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying we have a different experience. And so, so my experience as I left home and I went into young adulthood was kind of shocking, I think, to go out in the world. I had this sort of very nurturing environment at home, and I went out into the world, and I moved from, the country into a big city to go to college. and I think it just kind of out of self-defense, self-protection, I sort of shut off my gifts. I think I was using them a little bit here and there, but I really just shut off my spiritual connection. I shut off my intuitive, empathic self. I didn't want to receive these messages. And I didn't really listen to my own inner knowing for a very long time. And there was things to be learned during that period. As a matter of fact, tomorrow I'm actually going to do a workshop, co-facilitate a workshop on the dark night of the soul. And I would say that was kind of my dark night of the soul, right? Where I sort of lost myself. I forgot who I was. So I was very tuned in as a child. Then I sort of forgot who I was. And then in my 40s, I looked around and I said, "Oh, what life am I leading? What have I been doing? I'm trying to, be in this sort of mainstream, culture which says, you need to hustle and you need to work your way up the ladder and you need to make this amount of money. You need to have these things." And I went, "What's the meaning here?"
Yeah.
And I really had this reawakening. and started going into meditation and learning, metaphysics and all of these things. And it was like a remembering of that. And it's just been this process of unfolding. And now those gifts are even stronger than ever. And as a part of that, I realized, and I read the book on high sensitivity by Elaine Aron, and I wanted to meet other people like myself. I had functionally been a hermit. I had like very few friends, never had anyone over to my house. I was just really isolated. And so I started a meetup group. For those that aren't familiar with Meetup, it's like a social interaction site where people with the same interests can get together and meet and connect. And I opened up my home and I invited strangers in. So this was a huge stepping past my comfort zone, right? And I had been teaching. I taught in youth programming for about 12 years. So I was a teacher, and this is how I was so passionate about children and their well-being, as I actually worked for a youth organization for many years. And so I brought that forward and started teaching these classes. And in the first session, there were like 10 of us that stood in this big group hug and we're like, we found our tribe. It was just amazing. And as time went on, I was still kind of working this corporate job and teaching on the weekends. And there was something that switched inside of myself. And I said, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And this is kind of a path that I've seen a lot of people take where, they were kind of tuned in as a child. Then they sort of shut it off. Then they had some kind of awakening, whether that was midlife or earlier. And then they're like, what am I here to do? How am I here to serve? And then this just leads them forward. And and we really haven't touched upon intuition as much yet. So I'd like to talk about that for a minute because it's very connected. I find that like almost every empath I've met is also very, very intuitive, and they sort of interweave with each other. But this intuition is our ability to tap into something much greater than ourselves and have this really holistic understanding of the world around us, of ourselves. In science, they say, our brain's been gathering all this stuff our entire life, and then people who are highly intuitive have wiring that allows us to just pull those connections together and immediately see a pattern or a connection and have that aha moment. For me, from a spiritual perspective, it's like tapping into the oneness. It's tapping into this greater web of consciousness, and everything is available if we open ourselves to that. And everything in life is talking to us. Someone in one of my communities wrote about the energy of seclusion this morning, and then I was like, I'm supposed to be in the energy of seclusion today. I need to come back into myself. And so when we watch and we listen, and it shows up in song lyrics, and it shows up when having a conversation with someone like you, and it shows up with something we read on the internet, and then we see it like 3 other times, we're like, okay, this is a message for me. For me, it shows up with spirit animals. For example, different animals show up in my life, and I have this really close interaction with them. And then I'm like, what's the characteristic of that? Like, what am I supposed to be learning here? And so as a child, I was very tuned in to that intuitive knowing and just followed things. So what I'm experimenting now in my life is, what if I just follow that all the time? I just follow that energy. And when something feels really hard, really difficult, it's a struggle, that's not the right path. And so I like readjust myself, and I'm like, okay, this is flowing, this is flowing. You were talking earlier about being in the flow and going with those things that feel right. They feel right in our body, they feel right in our mind. We're not conflicted about it. It's like, yeah, this is the right path. And so especially as young children, and then going into, adolescence and young adulthood, teaching intuitive children to really trust that part of themselves, to trust that knowing. And that knowing is like, it's like their soul is calling out. And if they're listening, things will be better, and there were times in my life when I didn't trust, like I had a really strong knowing and I did the opposite. And then the consequences showed up, right? So this was a way to like really learn Maybe learn the hard way some ways, but that's part of the human experience is how do you trust yourself? How do you believe in that inner voice? How do you believe in that deeper inclination and follow it? And sometimes these things seem weird or radical. Like I had an intuitive knowing, it's like, oh, I should move from Indiana to Texas. And I didn't know anyone here and I'd never lived here. And it's like, okay, just, put the house up for sale and do it. And I trusted, and all of this rolled forward. This is where I learned that I was an empath. And this is where I stepped into becoming a coach and a spiritual teacher. And so when we begin to really trust that part of ourselves, even when it doesn't make sense logically, as things get better and better for our lives. And children can do this as well. Children have this deep, deep intuitive knowing.
I always wonder too, and I was thinking about this morning, like not a synchronicity, because I was watching my daughter jump up and down, and I was going, as a child, like in your head, you already get that feeling. You're like, I should jump off this stair. I should jump up and down here. I should pick that flower. And it's not even should. It's like your body's just drawn there, so you're already naturally doing it,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm going to go to this person. And then we as adults, granted, I get there's a point where you're trying to teach safety and all of these things, but we as adults do entangle it a lot. Like, no, you trust what I say and not what you say. And versus having a conversation a lot of times. Or the formula is that you are supposed to do A, B, C, D, and that's what makes it correct. When in actuality, you have a child that's got a completely different idea, especially with these, with the depth of processing, the D part that you were talking about. I can tell you 120% of the time, if I give my kids the moment to really explain why they're going against something that I'm saying or something that I've told them is right, I've almost never not been wrong. I'm always wrong. And, it could be something like, no, you had the charger. Or it could be something like, no, you didn't see your grandfather, but why are you telling me I'm lying? And when you start to really not cater to it, connect with that, then there is really no reason for lying in that case. And it's not lying, it's them trusting in themselves. And then it doesn't have to get worked up later. I hope. I don't know. I do not worry. I'm interested to see what will happen now living this life with my own children who are still quite young. What we venture in with that space and them trusting in their own, their own intuition, their own gut feelings. Like, what will the transition into teenage years and adulthood look like? I'm like you said for yourself, like you had to shut it off. I mean, right now, at least I think my kids are living this weird, creative, open space. And I'm not sure, like I as a parent, I'm not going to be perfect. Like that I give them enough of the heads up or the conversations that, it's not always that way on the outside. I mean, we had to hand in our homeschooling docs yesterday, and my son he almost wouldn't let me hand them in. And I was like, just let me hand them in. It's like super easy. I just have to hand in this letter. And it ended up taking like a 20-minute conversation where he pretty much blew me and my husband's mind. He said, we're trusting what's inside of us, so we shouldn't ever have to prove it to another person. And, he's 8. He said, why should we have to prove it to another person? And I said, well, you're sitting there being asked these ridiculously hard questions as an adult, and I'm giving him the answer, well, that's the law. Well, why don't you question the law? And I was like, because I'm not there yet. I'm just trying to get you guys to adulthood. And, well, maybe you should question the law. And then I had to phrase it back to him. I'm like, well, maybe you can question the law. He goes, maybe I will. And this is how I'll do it. And this is why I'll do it. And so we were sitting in the school district parking lot, discussing what it is like to question the law when somebody is in the second grade. And that to me was just the depth of processing part is huge. So now I come to my question after all that is, when I was watching the movie, The Sensitive Untold Story that you recommended to me, which was amazing for somebody, especially too, if you're hearing highly sensitive person for the first time, I couldn't recommend more. It's a great introduction to it, and it gives you science and it gives you other people. But they were talking about when you're raising a highly sensitive child, the difference between having them unsupported, where they would probably go into depression or those things much quicker than a not highly sensitive child, versus being supported, where actually they would hold the support more like with greater hold than a not highly sensitive child. Would you speak a little bit on that for me, if you mind?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things they cover in that movie, and it is, as you said, a fantastic introduction, and I've watched it about 8 times and always see something different in that, because there's so much richness there. So I'll give you an example. There's something called differential susceptibility. And this is what we touched upon earlier, which is that highly sensitive people and highly sensitive children in particular react much more positively to positive environments, nurturing, supportive environments, and we react much more negatively to unsupportive and difficult environments. And that doesn't mean that a person who went through trauma or not feeling understood or even being abused as a child cannot heal from that and move on and live and thrive as a sensitive person. It just takes a lot more. So with sensitive children, there's such an importance of providing that nurturing, supportive environment in those childhood years in order to affect the rest of their life. And so I did have that really nurturing, supportive environment. And even so, there was a part of me that kind of turned some of that off. So it can happen. But there was also a lot of learning for me too. So I don't mean to make that sound like everything that happened was negative. There's always a deep learning when we go through this contrast, between one thing and another. But here's an example. I recently coached a woman who was in her 60s. And she said when she was a young child, she had prophetic dreams. She could dream about something, and then she would tell her parents or her family, and these things would come true. And her family got really, really scared about that, really fearful. And sometimes that is the reaction that we receive when we tell people what we know, is that it can be really unnerving. I mean, it was even a little bit unnerving for you to have a conversation, with your 8-year-old about, well, why aren't we, coming up against the law, and why do we have to justify what we're doing? And, and so you can imagine if someone's saying, oh, I saw that this person's going to pass away, and then they do, that's really unnerving for a parent.
Well, you don't have the answer. You really don't. That's the other thing too I noticed, is that all of these questions that were getting asked of me, I had not thought about. I had not really thought about to question, and I did not have the answer. So be okay with being like, I don't have the answer right now, and I need a few days to really hash out how I feel about this.
Right.
Yesterday, we just couldn't get out of the parking lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So for this particular person, the fear kind of led her parents to, and that was kind of par for the course at the time, to take her to a psychiatrist. They thought something was, wrong with her. She had mental illness. They were wanting to medicate her. They even, said, oh, well, maybe she needs to go into a treatment facility. And that scared her so badly that she just stopped talking about it. She just turned all of that off for literally about 55 years. So she came to me at age 60 something and said, I think I'm finally ready to see what this is. And so that's obviously an enormously dramatic example of when you're not supported in your gifts. And granted, like, I have compassion too for her family, who, you know, I don't know their background or their history, but, you know, that could have been very, very unnerving to have a child do that. And that's what they knew how to do at the time. And so she was working through some of that healing. On the other side, if you have a family and support system like yourself, who's willing to sit there, and even if you don't have the answers and you don't know what that looks like, you're willing to listen and to consider their viewpoint. It's like, you know, yes, you're 8, but you're also incredibly tuned in, and you're looking at the world and you're seeing all these things, and it's legitimate for you to have these questions. It's okay to ask, it's okay to question, it's okay to experience what you experience, and that will actually change and shift everything. I have to say that for myself, the reason I've done so many things I have and stepped forward into leadership is really because my family allowed me to be who I was. And I've told my my mother and my stepfather, thank you so much for, you know, allowing me to do that in so many ways in my life. When someone didn't understand me, I was still okay inside with who I am. And so that makes an enormous difference. So this differential susceptibility, this is the place where we really have the opportunity to intervene and really shift and make a difference for that. And you seem, Tara, to be pretty tuned in yourself, but, you know, sometimes sensitive children are born to someone who doesn't experience the world that way. And so they literally don't have the same viewpoint, the same experiences, the same, they can't tap into that piece. And so it's okay, you know, it's okay that a parent doesn't know exactly how to do all of that, you know, but just being there, just being willing to listen, just being willing to consider that there's a different way of being, that your child doesn't have to be like you, they can be like them. And you can appreciate and enjoy that and nurture them for that. I think that's just so, so important.
I think also too, I think when you realize that your own, this is a big thing for me, when I realized that what intuition was and figuring it as a guidance system, right? Like they have this at all times that they can use to navigate the world and not be surprised. And yes, they're going to run up against problems and whatnot. Um, but it's almost like if I ask you to shut that down by shutting you down, I've
Mhm.
shut you down. So until you shut that down, we're not having this conversation. You know, I'm the mother. You're wanting to come to me. I'm your child. You're my child. Um, how I kind of almost put them in the dark, you know? I I us shutting that down, though it may happen, and yes, Dark Night of the Soul has been huge in lessons and everything like that. But in my being able to relate to other people. But with a child, you know, it's like going into a dark room after being able to see all the colors and everything like that. I shut that down, and now I have to make my way to the path somehow,
Mhm.
because in order for me to have this relationship with you, I have to I have to turn it off.
Mhm.
And I remember really thinking with my own children, thinking about them as adults. And this was over a timepiece where I started listening to other people talk about their parents, as you did. And I like wanted to know how I wanted them to speak about me, you know? And what, sure, I hope this isn't like an ego statement, because I'm not trying to put expectation on it of how they viewed me, but what they would say to others and saying, well, you know, she helped me do this and she helped me do that. And by just letting me be.
Mhm.
And that was a big moment for me. I remember sitting at it was like a family reunion thing, and everybody was talking about like our like great grandmother and grandmothers, and I love them, but it wasn't good.
Mhm.
And um and I could just see it trickling down the line because I was doing the same stuff. And But one thing I did notice that they were saying the whole time was like, even though all these things were so extreme, the love was so extreme. So I was like, so what if I just concentrate in that department?
Mhm.
And nobody felt listened to. And what if I do listen?
Mhm.
Like you said, like you're so thankful that they listened and they let you be weird. And I think people could really to sit with that question. Who do you want your children? What do you want them to say about you?
Mhm.
And it's not like she gave me a ton of presents. That's not what I'm saying. Like a
Mhm.
deep thought of it.
Yes, yes. And what I'll say is, although I can say that, having a dark night of the soul was a learning experience for me, the reason I do this work, this healing work with people who've come through that, and I primarily concentrate with adults, but is that so future generations, they don't really have to go through that they can just be tuned in when they're a child and then continue to strengthen that throughout their life. And that becomes the norm. It's why I agreed to host the Evolutionary Empath Summit this past year, is because the main message I wanted to give out there was this is our normal. There's nothing wrong. And there are other people who experience life this way, and you're just fine. And if we can, through your work, through my work, through the work of so many others who are giving out this same message, allow the next generations who are very tuned in, and I think there are more and more children coming on this planet who are in that space, that this is the evolution of humanity, that we're supposed to open up to these gifts. We're supposed to be able to trust our intuition. We're supposed to be able to come from this deep place of love and this caring and this listening and allowing each other to be, and appreciating of our diversity, and caring for our planet and having deep empathy and being deep thinkers. This is like where we're going. And some people came here sooner to sort of role model that, and some of us went through some difficult things in that journey, and that was a part of our soul's journey. But I think a part of their soul's journey is to have that way be less stressful, less traumatic, less ups and downs, and more human potential. Because when we don't shut people down when they're very young, or even when they're older and they're an adult, when we really allow people to be expansive, when we allow them to be exactly who they are, when we express that authenticity, then our potential as humanity grows and goes in this positive direction. I think, a lot of the things that we've seen in our world are because we tried to clamp down and we tried to make everything uniform and we tried to control it all. And when we really understand that people have a knowing of what's right for them, and if we allow them to be in that space, then they thrive. I mean, they blossom. And so that's my wish, is that future generations don't have to go through a dark night of the soul. They don't have to shut down their gifts, that they really can just be who they are throughout their entire lifetime. And that would be incredible.
I have one question for you. Do you feel that people who are not highly sensitive or empathic, who they feel like they're on the bigger part of the bell curve or the other side of the bell curve, do you think that is something that they can um, sow within themselves, work on, develop?
Right, right. So there's different theories about that. I mean, some people think that, it's always the nature versus nurture debate, right? Like, are we born this way, or can we become this way? And what I'm seeing, so I'm on the side of that. I think people are biologically born to be maybe more tuned in. It doesn't mean I don't think that we can then change that, and we can work on those gifts and abilities and skills within us. And what I'm excited about is that at no other time in our planet's history are more people sort of awakening to this, becoming more conscious of their spiritual connection. And I'm excited to be a part of that movement of helping people do that. And so I've had quite a few friends who I would say are moderately sensitive. As a matter of fact, one of them took the HSP test, and he and his wife were like right on the edge. And he was really disappointed. He's like, I wanted to be highly sensitive. And I said, well, that's really funny because some highly sensitive people don't want to be. But I could see that he was really good at reading people, and he was very intuitive. And I think through my interactions with him, like he was exploring that part of himself that he really maybe wouldn't have otherwise. So I'm very optimistic that this is a place where everyone can go to, that, you know, this is the evolution of humankind, because really we've had all of these different eras of, for example, the Renaissance, where we opened up culture and art and music and writing and inventions and all these things. And then we went through the Industrial Revolution, where we learned about machines and all that. And then we went through the technological revolution. And I feel like this next evolution of humanity is consciousness. Like, what are we capable within? This is the next frontier. Like, we haven't even delved into what that looks like for so many people to be tuned in. And I think that all of these things had to happen, including like the internet, to connect us and to create this huge clearinghouse of human experience, right? You can get on and you can find anything that you want to read about, anyone's culture, anyone's experiences, blogs. And I feel like all of that was preparing us for this next step,
Yeah.
which is, how do we take all these tools that we've developed and how do we use them in a way that benefits everyone on the planet? And maybe, you know, as some are exploring, like, where do we go into the solar system or the universe, you know, and how does humanity expand itself into other planets and colonies and things like that. So human consciousness, I think, is this next leading edge, and it's a really exciting time to be here. And I think that especially going to this futurism conference last weekend, and I saw people who were maybe 20 years my junior, and I was like, I am so optimistic about the future of our planet, because they already have the level of understanding of consciousness, spirituality that I have at age 46, but they're 26. And granted, they'll still go through their life experiences, but and I think that your son, you know, at age 8, he's like, well, why is this a law? And like, why is education this way? And can't we like make our own education system? So they're already awake. You know, it took me a long time to sort of wake up and begin doing this work. And it happened for me at exactly the right time for me. And it happens for each person at exactly the right time for them, including the client who was 60 and was like, I want to explore my dreams. It happened the right time for her as well. But it's really, really amazing to see that young people are coming in and they're already tuned in. You've seen that with the school protests, where they walk out of school and they're like, this is our environment, this is our planet, and we are demanding as young people, like, we're leveraging our personal power from within and saying, no, like, make choices for our generation. And so you're seeing all this change and shift. So while the world can feel really chaotic, what's happening is everything that didn't work for us as human beings is sort of like being exposed for all to see. And there's an opportunity to heal that and to move into a different direction. And this sort of new era is coming forward, a new renaissance, if you will. So it's really exciting. And the work you're doing to help parents nurture that next generation of who is going to set the future and the foundation for humanity going forward, say the next 100 years, that's so exciting to do that work.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more with everything that you said. I feel like I go into social circles and I'm like the optimist, and, you know, everyone's like, what's wrong with her? Like, there's legit something wrong with her. And I'm like, no, I'm very optimistic about the future.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't, I'm totally with you. There was something that I've been reading about, like DNA too, is that, you know, experience and what you do in your life so will actually alter your DNA, and then it'll pass down the line. So that's why I love to ask that question, because I always wonder too, if I keep opening these channels and these in the psychic development, like, am I altering my own DNA? And then if I'm doing that with my own children, if they want to, you know, it's never a force.
Mm-hmm.
that goes right down the line. So it will, in my mind, like it will work itself into the DNA somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And there's more science about it. They do it with mice and shocking them. It's horrible things, but it does prove stuff. They did the one science experiment where they would shock a mouse every time it smelled cherry blossom scent.
Mm-hmm.
And so literally it went all the way down, like great grandchildren. Just when the cherry blossom scent smell came, they would become anxious, even though they never got shocked. So like, imagine where you do it if you put it in the positive
Mm-hmm.
and like altering your DNA,
Yeah.
eating better food, all different kinds of things. But
Yeah.
that's, no pun intended, food for thought. So we've, I hate even to end this here. Um, where can my listeners find your work? I know you have the Guild and you have so much amazing stuff out there. Where can they at least find some place to connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So probably the best starting place is my website, which is perceptivesouls.com. And yes, I have an online immersive community called the Guild of Perceptive Souls. And this is where we're going in and we are learning how to be fluent in the language of energy, how to be an observer of our own life, how to do what you're talking about, which is how can I observe those patterns in my family system and my past and then shift that energy into a new pattern and really then come in and share this with others who are also doing this work and a really safe space for sensitive and empathic people to just be themselves fully out. And so yeah, that would be a great place to start. And I'm also a leadership mentor for sensitive and empathic and intuitive adults, whether they're in the business world, whether they are starting their own company, whether they're interested in getting into coaching, whatever that looks like. So I would love to connect with anyone. And I love to just talk about this subject in general and connect it and provide resources and support. Yeah, there's some free things. I've been blogging for multiple years. So there's lots and lots of articles that people can tap into about this subject.
I'm with you on that. I actually love being a resource. Like I love being the resource hub. Like, people always think like, well, it's not pushing you or you're not getting something from it. I said, you don't understand what I am getting from it. I love being the resource hub. I'm getting so much just from helping myself, just putting it out there for whoever else wants it.
Yeah,
It,
absolutely.
it feeds you. So, well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming on my podcast. And I'm so glad to make the connection with you and now have you a part of my world.
It was such an honor, Tara. I appreciate being able to come and talk about things I'm so passionate about and connect with you and hear your story as a mother who's just really nurturing and supporting not only yourself, but your children. I thank you for doing that important work and bringing this out to others who want to do that important work. I say I was never able to have children myself, but I say that that is the number one most important job in the entire world is raising another human being into a space where they can grow up and contribute meaningfully to this world. So thank you for you and all the listeners who are doing that. I honor you so much.
Oh, thank you so much.